All right, let's rock and roll. Hello, everyone. It's Casey Ellis speaking. I'm the founder and CEO of BugCrowd. It's a pleasure to be, kicking this off today. And thanks, Sam, for the introduction. I'm super excited for what we're doing here. I got to say, it's funny. 9 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, and I'm into my second Red Bull. A little bit nervous, frankly, because I'm aware of some of the minds that are on this webinar, and it's a privilege to be able to open this up and present to you guys. So, it'll be a good one. We'll see how we go. What I'm going to be talking about today is really my perspective on the state of bug bounties, like the state of the industry where it's at right now, and that'll be partly based off the report that we did. And we'll kind of go from there. I'll share some other things. I've got an agenda slide in a sec here. But first things first, massive thanks to Sam and Jason Haddix for putting this all together. It's been really cool seeing the buzz coming together around this from the hacker community and within the office as well. I think everyone's really pumped to see how this all goes today, see what gets learned, see what kind of value that we can give back to the community, and see how that kind of plays out over the next period of time as we continue on this bug bounty journey. So many thanks to you guys. Big thanks as well to everyone who's presenting. As I said before, we've got a pretty formidable list of folks that are going to be sharing their knowledge with you today. So many thanks for signing up for this one, and I'm hoping that you guys all get something great out of it as well. So in terms of what we're going to cover in my slide today, excuse me while I stop Zoom from harassing me here. There we go. All right, so who am I? Who's this Aussie dude on the end of the line? And in that section, I'm going to give you guys a brief history of kind of why I started BugCrowd and what was in my mind at that point in time. Then we'll move on to the state of the industry based on the data that we've gotten, some of the observations that we've made, and some of the conclusions that I've drawn personally as well around, where is the industry up to? Like, this bug bounty thing essentially didn't exist except for in the mind of a bunch of really nerdy people, even 4 years ago. But now it seems to be something that everyone in the security industry at the very least is aware of, and a lot of people outside of it as well. So we'll talk to that. I'm going to put my kind of wizard soothsayer hat on and have a bit of a conversation about where I think the industry is going to go from here. Part of my job here is to basically predict the future and figure out what's going to happen so we can guide BugCrowd to that point. And I've got a few ideas about what this industry looks like over the next 3 to 5 years. And then at the end, this is probably my favorite part, is when I get to answer some of your questions that you've submitted through the forms. And thank you very much for sending those through. All right, we good to go? Let us begin. So I've kind of preempted myself a little here and already told you I'm Casey Ellis, but here it is again. I'm on Twitter. Casey John Ellis is my handle. If you follow me, I apologize, and you're welcome all at the same time. I think Twitter as a tool for bug bounty hunters, especially globally, and for cybersecurity professionals, has just been fantastic to learn and network and build friendships and things like that. And a fun fact there is that the first, I would say, probably 1,500 people that joined the BugCrowd platform back in 2012 were as a result of a couple of tweets that I sent out, basically saying, hey, we're going to try this thing out. If you want to sign up, come here. So if you're not on it, you should get on it. I think it's a really awesome tool for security people. Outside of that, I'm a husband of one and a father of two. My backstory is that I basically dropped out of college to join an IT engineering job and started hacking stuff pretty much straight away. And that ended up turning into a pen testing career for a period of time. Then I made a bit of a weird shift across into sales and solutions architecture, because I wanted to see what it looked like when you not only solved a technical problem, but then were able to communicate it and actually connect it to the market where those problems were, finding solutions that needed to be solved. So it's a bit of an unconventional shift, but at some point that back of house experience and the front of house experience got together and had a baby is kind of how I express it. And I got it in my head that I wanted to be an entrepreneur and do startup things. There was a couple of different iterations of that, but really, the creation of BugCrowd was in 2012. We actually launched our first bug bounty program in 2012, and that was the first bug bounty as a service program to hit the market, and pretty much it's been all systems go since then. So from my perspective, I'm passionate about building, learning, teaching. I'm passionate about the community. I love, there's I would say the thing that is most rewarding for me out of this whole experience with Bugcrowd is seeing the the personal and professional growth in all sorts of different members of the community and from all different walks of life and parts of the world as well, which is part of why, you know, when Haddix and Sam were cooking up this idea of an internet-based conference that wouldn't rely on someone actually jumping on a plane and flying to a particular place, I was down for it and understood it straight away. It's something that we really value as a company, and it's a personal thing of mine as well. So speaking to, you know, why are we even doing this in the first place? Like, let's have a quick conversation about that, because we're all, you know, in here as bug bounty hunters and people that have our nose pressed up to the coalface, so to speak. But, you know, you step back for a minute and ask the question, like, why is this even a thing in the first place? The guy who's up on the screen right now is Jeff Truhaff, and he was the guy who basically set up Netscape's bug bounty program in 1995, which is, you know, generally recognized as the first security technology bug bounty program in existence. We have the vulnerability annihilation thing that actually goes back to a lockpicking bug bounty program back in 1851, but that's a little out of scope of what we're doing today. So, but yeah, with Jeff, you know, one of the conversations that I got to have with him was the fact that, you know, in the early days of Netscape, security wasn't top of mind. It wasn't even really a thought that they'd had yet, because the whole idea of having an internet that you could, you know, use and have used to attack what you're doing was foreign. It hadn't been created yet. And when they started seeing people messing with Netscape software and you know, basically damaging the trust of the users that were using that software, what they realized was this actually threatens the potential future of the internet itself. And that's why they decided, yep, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go out, leverage as much creativity as we can from the people that are outside the four walls of our business and get them to help us make this stuff more secure. And that was, I think, incredible foresight for 1995. It's definitely come in handy over the past, you know, 4 years as the cybersecurity jobs market has gotten pretty crunchy and as the bad guys have gotten more active. So let's jump into the, you know, really the present, the things that we're seeing. If you haven't seen our State of Bug Bounty report, it's something that we've done for the last 3 years. And it's really, you know, the exercise is to, you know, partly, well, you know, one of the goals is to be transparent as a business and actually share what's going on, because we think that's important for you guys in the hacker community and that side of the business, but then also on the demand side in terms of the customers that we're working with as well. But the other thing that it calls out and shows is this whole, you know, idea of the trends that are happening in the market over time, which is most of what I'm going to talk to in this section, right? So what we've seen over the past 12 months, in my mind, you know, really what we saw over the past 12 months is the concept of bug bounties breaking out of the idea of just being, you know, a geeky tech thing that crazy Bay Area companies do to something that is actually, you know, a solution to a much wider problem in the traditional market. We saw enterprise adoption. So in terms of adoption from traditional companies, you know, those of you who work on those programs will know what I'm talking about there. We saw that basically multiply threefold. And, you know, what we also saw was this trend for interest in bug bounty programs starting to come more from larger companies. You know, it started off with tech companies and I think small to medium businesses, but what we saw over the past 12 months is this very strong trend towards like the larger organizations looking at all of this and saying, hey, this is a good way to do this. Like, yeah, and seeing that, you know, that was the thesis. That's actually the picture that I had of the market when I first started the company. So to actually see that start to play out and start to see data that supports that, it's pretty rewarding and very exciting, I think, for all of us that are involved in this industry, because I think it's going to grow and I think it's going to continue to grow for a very long time and become quite a big deal. The other thing that we saw as Bugcrowd was you know, pretty rapid uptick in program launches. Like this has grown steadily pretty much since we've you know, formed the business, but it hasn't slowed down. I think that's the main point there. If anything, it's accelerating as we go along. So from an economic standpoint, there's a really good question around this in the AMA that I'm going to come back to, but I'll tap on, you know, what we're seeing in terms of which industries are paying out what and what did the trends look like. You know, our overall payouts went up 200%. We've now crossed $8 million paid out to the crowd. The average payout over the past 12-month period ending at March 31st was $451, which is trending north. And that's exciting. That's really good, I think, for everyone involved, because, you know, you guys as hunters, guys and girls, apologies, as hunters need to be in a position where, this is rewarding for you. Like you're getting rewards out of the intellectual asset and the opportunity to hack new things, and just the fact that hacking is what you would do, anyway. But the whole economics of the fact that, people need to eat, to me, that's going to become more and more critical to this industry as it grows. So to see, the rewards that we're paying out trend north in a way that's more rewarding and more economically stable for the people that are doing work on these programs, that's a really good thing. But then at the same time, there has to be like a logical, cap to that. One of the things that I always talk about is if a cheeseburger cost $1 million, then no one would want a cheeseburger anymore. So there's a logical, I think, normalization point that we're starting to trend towards, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. In terms of where we've seen the payouts trend from an industry standpoint, automotive has been, very much the standout in terms of, the size of the vulnerabilities that get paid. And that's mostly because of the complexity of the issues that get found. They're actually, it's difficult to hack a car, as you'd imagine, and there's not a whole lot of people that can do it. So when there's critical things that come through, that's seen as incredibly valuable by automotive manufacturers. But then I think also because of the safety impact of those vulnerabilities, right? You're talking about at this point, a 2-ton mobile phone that can kill people. So, the whole idea of making sure that it's secure from a cyber safety standpoint is something that, the automotive industry has really like lent in on very hard over the past 12 months. And that's been exciting to see. To be honest, I haven't seen a vertical, like an industry, adopt the whole concept of vulnerability disclosure and crowdsourcing at such a rapid pace as the automotive industry. It's almost like they all just kind of switched on to the idea at once and jumped in the pool, which is a really cool thing to see. Because you think about it, like as we go forward, we're moving into a period of connected vehicles, and pretty soon we'll be in a period of autonomous vehicles. So this whole idea of making sure that the software that powers these things is safe, that's something that they as an industry are getting ahead of, which is brilliant. I mean, I think, as a security professional that's been in the industry, pretty much for 18 years now, I think the thing that's been really interesting about the past 4 years is, prior to that, it was people like us, basically standing on the street corner, yelling at people and trying to get them to care about security, because they always have the option just to ignore it and see what happens anyway, right? But over the past 4 years, I think starting off with some of the leaks and some of the awareness that happened in 2013, and then this increasing cadence of really large scale impactful breaches, security has become something that is top of mind in enterprise, and really what they're starting to think about it as is something that their customers are going to care about as well. So them getting proactive about that is a really good thing for risk, and it's going to be a good thing for them as businesses as well. I think beyond this, leisure travel and tourism and software, those two are kind of neck and neck. And I think, when you look at what they're doing, it's a similar kind of story. Like the criticality and the complexity of the issues that get found that are high impact, they're difficult, and they want to pay well for those. But then also the impact of what you can actually do if you find a critical bug in those sorts of spaces, in terms of, the impacts on privacy, impacts on customer data, and then impacts on the business themselves and their ability to actually function is quite high and quite obvious. So they're paying out quite well too. And there's others in there, and it basically trails off from there. You can sort of see there's this outlier in automotive, leisure and tourism, and then computer software kind of neck and neck, and then it seems to go down, but it's a fairly gentle curve, which speaks to what I was saying before about this whole concept of normalization of bug price. But I'll come back to that a little bit later. So in terms of the vulnerabilities that we've seen come through the platform, we've seen a pretty strong increase in P1s. And for those of you who bug hunt on BugCrowd, you know that we don't award a P1 easily. We actually think that's, basically overhyping the criticality of an issue is a pretty, swift way to get a customer to switch off to real risk. So that's one of the reasons that we do that. But if you find a P1 and you're being rewarded for a vulnerability as a P1, it means that you found something that's really important and is quite high in its potential for impact to the business. And you guys understand how this works. Like the first to find each unique vulnerability is the one who gets paid. The more severe the issue is, or the more critical the issue is, the more the payout is. So given that incentive model, and I think given the influx of new and more developed skill sets into the community, that's really all contributed to this increase in critical issues that we're seeing come through. In terms of the number of vulns, we've seen 57,000 valid vulnerabilities submitted to the Bugcrowd platform, which is tremendous in terms of what it says about the performance and really just the intent and the creativity and the drive that exists within the crowd. I think that's a good number to have. And the other thing as a business is that we work very hard to basically make the conversation between the customers that we have and the hackers that are working on their programs as smooth as possible, and keeping in mind that these are two groups of people that are historically terrible at getting along and traditionally treat each other with a fair amount of suspicion and distrust. So we got ahead of that and got very proactive about basically smoothing out that process and making sure that it runs fairly and efficiently. And part of that is making sure that when folks in the community submit a vulnerability, they don't feel like they're shouting into a black hole. I think that's a really important thing, because regardless of whether you're doing that for payment, or you're doing it just because it's interesting, or you're doing it because you want to make the internet a safer place, the thing that you don't want as a researcher is to feel like you're being ignored. So what we've done is we've really put a lot of effort into accelerating our time to first touch. And that's primarily driven by the ASC team that sits under Ryan Black and those guys in the tech ops crew. And we've seen that decrease quite dramatically over the past little bit. So this one's interesting, and I think it's relevant to the people in the audience. We saw the crowd size double. It's now roughly 60,000 registered on the platform, or actually it's over definitively 60,000 people registered on the platform, with about 20% active. And there's a lot of conversations and questions that I get from people around how many of those people are actually active users as opposed to people that have signed up. It's absolutely true. Not all of them that sign up for an account and come in and check Bugcrowd out end up submitting a vulnerability. But when you think about it in terms of a marketplace that's connecting a community of people with potential for demands, like that number is very relevant, because it represents the overall available pool of folk that are basically in a position where they put their hand up and said, I'll contribute to all of this. Another thing that we saw last year was that the US surpassed India for the largest number of security researchers signed up for Bugcrowd. India's always been like incredibly active and on the front foot in terms of people just catching the concept of bug bounty programs, getting really enthusiastic about it, and then telling their friends, which is good, and we're expecting to see that continue. But then to see, I think, North America increase in their participation on the platform, to me that's mostly a function of the fact that the job deficit around cybersecurity in the US is tremendous. Like, it's 209,000 unfilled roles in our industry right now. And I think if you're a technologist and you're smart and you have any kind of appetite for hacking, like, you look at bug bounty programs and think, okay, that's a really like low friction on ramp for me into this industry as a career. And there seems to be a lot of opportunity there. So I think that's what's actually driving that increase. It's interesting to see, on this graph here, like the tendency for priority based on geography. We threw that in there because, frankly, I just think it's fascinating. One of the things that we've seen as a general trend is that people who approach bounty hunting as a subsistence mechanism, so they're using it to basically pay the mortgage or pay the rent and eat, they'll tend to go for volume instead of going for criticality, because the risk of putting all of your effort into finding a critical issue, potentially not finding anything, but then also getting duped out or whatever else is higher, the more difficult that issue is to find. And the people that can do that and really want to do that, they'll go after it and crush it because that's what they love. But for folks that are looking at this as a way to keep the lights on at home, they'll tend to adjust the risk profile of how they actually approach testing to make sure that they've got a steady stream of income coming in from their bounty hunting, which I think is a pretty cool observation and a cool kind of phenomena that's happening out there in the industry. Australia has the most researchers per capita, and I'd ordinarily yell Aussie, Aussie, Aussie right now, but I'm not going to hear you guys say oi, 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 so I'll just assume that's happening. And Russia, where you at? It's interesting to see a real, frankly, lack of participation and engagement at this point from Russia and Eastern Europe. We've got a bunch of different theories around that. You know, it's well known that there's a lot of very proficient computer scientists and people that are excellent at defensive cybersecurity in that part of the world, but we're not seeing a lot of activity out of them just yet. You know, the thing to call out there is that we do have a number of Russian, like native Russian programs that will be starting over the next period of time. So if you're on this webinar and you're in that part of the world or can speak Russian, you know, keep that in mind as you're thinking about participation over the next period of time. And really, the thing to call out here as well, it's been fascinating watching this crowd grow. So I mentioned before the tweet and the initial kind of group of people that came in and joined the Bug Crowd platform. Really, what we've seen in terms of how the crowd's grown, it tends to grow through interest-based, like pre-existing interest-based groups, people that are friends with each other, and all kind of congregate around this topic of cybersecurity as a common interest. And, you know, one of them will go out and do a bug bounty program, they'll get a reward or they'll have a good experience and they'll tell their friends about it. And then their friends join and start participating as well. And what happens as a result of that is you see this kind of land and expand community growth thing in different parts of the world, because it also tends to be bounded by geography because of language. Like people that are speaking the same language are more likely to be talking to their same language friends about these types of things. So we've actually seen that influence how the crowd's grown. It's been a really interesting thing to watch. And it's an interesting thing for us to leverage as well as we go forward and figure out how to get more people into the mix and you know, productive in bug bounty programs. So, all right, this is my crystal ball session. And as I said before, you know, my primary job at Bug Crowd is to basically predict the future and try to, you know, get the timing right in terms of how Bug Crowd executes on how it's going to, you know, exploit that future and make that future better. And, you know, so far we've done a pretty good job of that as a business. And this is some of the stuff that I think is coming around the corner at this point. You know, just in general, interconnectivity at scale requires security assessment at scale. Like the big thing that's driving, you know, people, especially more traditional industries, to consider crowdsourcing and change how they think about how they engage people to help them out with their security assessment is that we're putting absolutely everything we can think of on the internet. You know, if you consider like what I was saying before about cars, you talk about IoT, you talk about the whole trend to push things out to the crowd. And this is even before like IPv6 becomes a properly adopted thing and increases the attack surface as a result of how that whole system works. We've got an attack surface that we already have a lot of debt in, and anyone who bug hunts knows that. You go into a company that, you know, probably thinks it's secure and you end up scaring them pretty quickly after launching a program. So there's not only that existing debt, but there's this future debt that we're going to incur as, you know, the rate of creating attack surface increases. You know, then there's the fact that there's not enough people to go around, and this whole idea that the existing economics of security assessment are basically flawed. Like I ran a pen test company prior to starting Bug Crowd, and that was really what gave me the idea for the business in the first place. This concept that, you know, one person with one skill set being paid by the hour is economically and mathematically disadvantaged if you're expecting them to compete with a group of people that have lots of different skill sets and are being incentivized by results. Like the math there doesn't stack up. The consultant who's being paid by the hour is going to fail at some point, and that failure is going to come faster unless you balance that equation out and start to level the playing field. So in my mind, all of these things together actually position crowdsourcing as really the only solution for being able to deliver, you know, human creativity to security problems, and that makes its ubiquity in terms of how it's, you know, applied across all sorts of different industries basically inevitable at this point. And as a side note to that, like I actually think this way about a lot of different industries. You know, you look at what 99 Designs did to the design industry. There's a whole bunch of different examples where the gig economy and competitive crowdsourcing has actually come in and basically made, you know, skills-based markets more efficient and made up for some of the deficits in you know, lack of resource and so on. I think over, you know, you throw this thing out 10 or 20 years, that model is going to touch pretty much every market. You know, the whole idea with Bug Crowd was I saw the trend around bug bounties and just decided, yep, cybersecurity is the next to adopt that. So next point, adoption is increasing threefold year on year. This will continue and most likely accelerate because of the network effect on both sides. And by both sides, I mean on the hacker side of the fence and also on the company side of the fence. Like we see two mechanisms of growth here. Like when hackers have a positive experience, as I said before, they'll talk about it, and that attracts more people into the mix. But then on the demand side, on the customer side, we see a very similar thing. We see, when people do public launches, or they talk publicly about their private programs and start to, basically, position the value and the benefit they're getting, and also the fact that it's actually not as scary as a lot of people, I think, assume it is. Their peers jump in. They basically see that as validation, and get a level of comfort. It's like a bunch of people standing around the pool waiting for the first person to jump in. So that network effect, I think, has driven a lot of the adoption in the market over the past 4 years, and I expect that'll continue, and it will probably accelerate as well. I mentioned this before a little bit, but bug pricing will continue to normalize, and I think in that mix, there's always going to be outlier companies that are going to put up like really high rewards to get very specific outcomes, and I think that's good. I think that'll be a feature of this economy for a long time to come. But there's consensus forming around what business as usual should look like from a pricing standpoint, and ultimately, I think this is a good thing for the long-term viability of the industry. One of the concerns that I've had, and I've had a bunch of conversations with different people about this on Bug Bounty Forum and Twitter and in other places, is this idea that we should pay as much as humanly possible out to the crowd for everything that they find, and the intent and motivation should be to just purely maximize that amount of payout. I actually don't think that's true. I think there's a balance to that. I think it should be as high as it possibly can be, but still be sane to the people that are actually running these programs. So there's a balance to that. And what I don't want you guys to hear me say there is that I don't want to see researchers get paid as much as possible, because that's not it. It's going back to that $1 million cheeseburger analogy that I use, tends to confuse people because it doesn't make any sense. But this whole idea of, if you're trying to sell something, there's a logical point at which the price will actually discourage buyers and you won't be able to sell it anymore. So if this thing is going to take over a decent chunk of the security assessment market as it exists today, and if it's going to grow to become ubiquitous across the pretty much the entire internet, it's actually like almost a necessity that there becomes some sort of consensus around what bugs are worth. And for those of you who've seen the VRT, the bug crowd users, and our defensive vulnerability pricing model, that's basically our attempt to capture the different bits of data that we see, obviously going through the platform, but then elsewhere as well, and try to pretty much draw a line in the sand in the middle of it all to let people know, hey, this is roughly where our averages are at this point in time. And that's early. We're only 4 years into this. I think the assumption is that everyone's running a bug bounty or a vulnerability disclosure program. That's not true. There's only thousands. It's in the thousands the number of companies that are doing this right now, which means there's millions that aren't. So logically, if it's going to grow, that needs to happen. As the community grows, better matching and program tailoring will reduce the sting of duplicates and make life even more rewarding for both sides. There's an interesting corollary that you hear from researchers, this whole idea of, if the crowd grows, then I'm going to be competing with more people, which means I'm more likely to get duped out or to have to work harder to be able to earn. That's a function of the model, and that is fundamentally true. But the way around that is to make sure that you're basically tailoring and matching the right people to the right targets with the right incentive, and then setting it up in a way where there's enough opportunity for them to be able to have a successful experience and deliver value to the program owner, but also is inclusive enough to allow the whole thing to grow. So that's how I'm thinking about that one. The right incentives will continue to drive researcher engagement and ultimately more and better vulnerability submissions. This is not just talking about cash here. I think cash is kind of the primary and the most obvious incentive that's in the mix. But when you think about things like job opportunities, the ability to develop skill sets and actually build out a career, like the ability to build future revenue potential and future intellectual happiness as a hacker, by coming in and engaging in these different programs that run, and also forming community around yourself, like that to me is actually as much of an incentive as cash. And obviously everyone needs food to eat at night, and you need cash to pay for that. So that's not to I think that's king in this equation, but those other pieces I think are going to become more and more relevant as we go along. And part of what Bug Crowd and a big part of what Sam Haddix and the team do is look at how can we deliver as much value as humanly possible to every hacker, regardless of whether they're being paid or not. And ideally you want to get them paid as well, but you understand what I'm getting at there. So that'll continue to be something that we evolve and grow. And what I expect to see happen is that those incentives will make things more and more rewarding and sensible for people as the market grows. And yeah, I kind of already alluded to this, but the trend around using bug bounty programs as a hiring on ramp will accelerate, and that goes back to what I was saying before with the deficit in job, the ability to fill jobs, particularly in the US. But there's, I think there was a Cisco report saying that there's 1 million unfilled cybersecurity roles worldwide at this point, and like that's a lot of people. So this whole idea of being able to source skills from places that you wouldn't ordinarily look, and on the hacker side, seeing people that come in who don't necessarily have a security career as their background, but are clearly very gifted hackers, like people that are engineers that get into gaming, for example. That mix of skills, I've seen that convert into someone who ends up being very proficient as a bug bounty hunter very quickly. And in terms of the people that are trying to hire folk, that's a really interesting and fast way to grow out your team. So I expect that trend will grow as well. All right, that's the end of my crystal ball session. So I'm going to take a sip of Red Bull here and we'll jump into AMA. Actually, I'm going to take a quick moment to look at the messages here. I see that comment. Jamaica is going to get on board soon. I'm looking forward to that, man. I'll keep an eye out for you. Yep, Africa is well represented. Yeah, it's an interesting one. They as a continent didn't get engaged until I think maybe 2 years ago, but it's grown pretty rapidly since then. Cool. All right, we'll keep going. Okay, why the name Bug Crowd? Great question. It's because it's a crowd that finds bugs. And that's really, the main reason. When I was thinking about, the folklore around and the actual story around, when I came up with the idea and actually kicked off Bug Crowd, it was actually on a flight from Melbourne to Sydney after I'd had a bunch of conversations with pen testing customers around bug bounty programs, and was starting to form a really clear picture of the kinds of things that would be required from a platform and a service to actually allow those sorts of organizations to engage this model. So there was sort of this light bulb moment that happened on that flight. I actually came up with the name Bug Crowd on that flight and cooked up the original Flex reward model. And then pretty much, drove straight home, got on the internet, registered the Twitter handle and bugcrowd.com as well. So if you do a who is, you can actually see what day that was. And that was really the day that the light bulb went off and all of this started to come together. But, the big thing about it was at that point in time in particular, the hot topic was bug bounties in the circles that I was running in and tapping on. So I wanted to have bug as a feature of the name to be able to have it connect back with the concept of bug bounties. So that's the reason why. Plus, I think it's cool. I like the name. I've always liked the name. So there's also that. Naming a company is hard, by the way. If any of you guys are doing the startup thing out there or thinking about it, it's one of the most annoying parts of it. But once you get it right and once you feel like you can be comfortable, it's almost like naming a child. At that point, you can kind of bond with them after you've done that, which is a cool thing. I like this one. Do you feel like you hack even when you don't hack in your daily actions? I can relate to this. I can actually answer this from a personal standpoint because, frankly, I don't spend a lot of time on the tools these days. Like BugCrowd has 110 employees, and I've spent the last 4 years figuring out how to transition from being a founder to being a CEO that actually runs the place, right? So a lot of my day is taken up with business stuff, quote unquote. So management, talking to people, helping make decisions, thinking about like strategies and go to markets and what does the future look like and all those sorts of things. And less time spent on actually breaking into stuff. Like I'll do a bit of threat research in my spare time if I'm feeling kind of compelled to do that. But otherwise, I'm not really on the tools that much anymore. That said, I still feel very much like there is a strong parallel, and I actually share this with a lot of security entrepreneurs that I speak to and do like mentorship stuff with. There's a lot of parallels between building a startup and offensive security, because you think about it, you start at point A, you've got a limited set of things at your disposal as tools. You've got a bunch of different things that are basically trying to prevent you from doing what you want to do, and you want to get to point B. So the goal becomes, how do you create that path? It's the same, to me, that's fundamentally, like, that's the essence of hacking. Like, the whole idea of challenging the status quo and actually trying to get things to bend to your will, in spite of their design. That's really the true essence of hacking in my mind. So I definitely feel like I hack even when I don't hack. And both of those, I'm doing air quotes for both of those while I'm saying this. So hopefully that answers that question. I really enjoy that topic, by the way. So, you folks that are out there that have the startup urge, make sure and feel very welcome to hit me up on Twitter and ask questions about that side of things, because it's something that I'm actually quite passionate about now, in terms of sharing all the crazy shit I've learned over the past 4 years with other people that are looking at getting into the same thing. What's your favorite color? I changed the background of this slide on purpose. It's I love our orange. Actually, I would say my favorite color is blue. But I love our orange. The funny story behind this is I actually picked orange for the express purpose of being the most obnoxious color in the different submissions to StartMate, which is the accelerator that Bugcrowd started life in back in Sydney. I wanted to be in a position where, when the mentors and the panelists were kind of getting together afterwards and deciding which ones they'd accept, if they couldn't remember me or couldn't remember the name Bugcrowd, they'd remember it was the one with the orange color. So that's why we have it, and it's stuck with us since. And I actually quite like it. This is a great one. How do you measure, or do you measure, the societal impact of bug bounties in any way? If not, why not? And how might you measure this? So it's an interesting question. We don't have like a societal impact dashboard in the Bugcrowd office. I think that's not something that we've like put a bunch of effort into, like, monitoring and measuring on a real-time basis, if that makes sense. But what we do pay a lot of attention to is the kind of personal impact we're having in the lives of the security researchers that actually work on the platform. And there's a couple of examples of that. Like, there's people that I know that are fantastic, like, very skilled, trustworthy, and brilliant people as bug bounty hunters who've run afoul of the law in the past, right? So you've got people that ended up in a position as they were growing up where, in general, their technical capability to do bad stuff outpaced the growth of their moral compass, and they ended up wandering off into shady territory and getting busted for it. To see people come out of that background and basically use those same security superpowers, but actually use them in a way that gives them a legal and a productive and a happy career path and really path in life. Like, to me, that's incredibly rewarding, and I think we'll see more of that. The whole idea of making sure that we're giving opportunities to understand the bright side, or the light side, so to speak, for young people that are getting into cybersecurity and hacking. That's going to become even more critical. Like, I've got a daughter who could unlock an iPhone when she was 6 months old, and the kind of technology acceptance that you see in, like, the next generation is frightening. Frankly, it's incredibly promising and brilliant, but it's kind of scary at the same time. So this whole ability to route that creativity and that passion into something that has a productive output that's going to keep people out of jail, I think that's something that we do see. It's something that I pay close attention to when I do see it. I wouldn't say that we're observing it as a core company, key performance indicator, but it is something that's near and dear to our hearts. I think the other piece that I look at, well, there's actually two more. The second piece is around people actually developing career paths and getting into the cybersecurity industry. And I mentioned before about people in Western countries in particular coming in from development or engineering and using bug bounties as an on-ramp into cybersecurity as a career. One of the things that I find really cool is seeing people from developing countries or countries with lower purchase power parity actually using bug bounty programs as a way to earn and pay their way through college, convince their parents that being a hacker doesn't mean they're going to turn into a criminal, all sorts of different things like that. And there's a lot of different stories that we've gathered over the years where that's actually happened. In fact, we just had a Twitter conversation about this with a couple of folk from India this morning, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. I think, the third thing, just briefly, is that we make life harder for the bad guys. The fact that we're reducing risk in the companies that we're finding issues in, like that's actually disrupting or making more difficult the criminal enterprise that wants to exploit those types of issues and really cause harm in doing so. So I think that's, probably the most obvious in terms of the overall thing that we're doing as a business. I think, the stuff that happens in the crowd is cooler, frankly. But that's a big one too. Why are Aussies so awesome in cybersecurity? I promise I didn't write this one. So um, look, I think there's a couple of things there. I've actually put a bit of thought into this. I think we're overrepresented in the bug bounty industry, partly because of Australia's technology kind of attitude to technology as a country. We tend to lean into this stuff pretty quickly. And also the fact that BugCrowd started there, like the industry as a platform kind of model. It kicked off first in Australia, with a bunch of my buddies basically jumping in and joining the platform. So it's not just Casey's friends in this mix. It's what happened after Casey's friends joined and how it kind of grew out there through network effect. So I think that's part of it. The other piece, and this is a little bit tongue in cheek, but I actually believe it's true. We kind of got there as a convict colony, right? We got busted stealing stuff in Britain, put on a boat and basically dropped on a rock and told to figure it out. As a culture, I think those roots are actually, pretty strongly evident still today in how we approach troubleshooting, how we have this general kind of disrespect or disdain for authority, or skepticism is probably a better word there, and just how we approach life in general. So I do see some pretty neat crossovers between those cultural features of the Australian people, and especially offensive hacking. What are your thoughts on black box versus white box testing? Which do you prefer and why? They both have their place. I think, the straight answer to that question is I always prefer white box testing, because I think, it's not just about adversarial simulation. I think if you're being tasked with doing as comprehensive a job as possible of assessing the risk of a target, the more you can know about that target, the better. It's going to make your job easier in doing that. So, that's why I always prefer white box, and it's also why I always prefer testing against production versus testing against UAT or staging. That said, both of those things aren't always possible, right? Like for companies to actually release source code into the crowd to allow white box testing, they have to have a level of trust of the people that are being engaged that basically allows them to do that. And I know of many organizations that won't even let their source code out to a third-party pen test firm that spends half their year sitting physically in the office, let alone out to this kind of new model and crowd of people. So I do see a lot of organizations do that. We've run programs where source code's been let out the door for the sake of the exercise. We've run programs where there's been prototypes that have been shipped out and different stuff like that. And I think as this grows and as we get even better as a company of basically attributing trust to the different people within the community, the demand side and the people that need their stuff tested will actually engage that more and probably lean more in that direction. The one thing I will say about black box testing is if you're looking at it as, I just want to get an attacker's view of what my risk is, without any kind of a head start, because I want to see what someone on the internet is capable of. There is a time and place for that. But as I said, the more information we can get out to you folk to actually do your work, the better, in my mind. Hi, Casey. Can you add the feature to disclose at least some reports public? So this is a good one. Basically, the reason that we haven't done that yet is because it terrifies the vast majority of the market. We sit in the middle of this industry as bug bounty hunters and people that philosophically and ideologically believe in vulnerability disclosure. And I think that can breed the assumption that everyone else is okay with it too. But the thing that I've always tried to balance out as we've grown the business is, okay, how do we push as hard as we can in the directions we think these things should go without pushing so hard that we freak people out and the whole system breaks, right? So that's why we haven't actually done that on platform yet. And part of it is as well, when there's programs that that allow disclosure, or they have a coordinated disclosure policy, or a disclosure on request policy, put it on your blog, like drive traffic to your own website. This is as much about you guys being in a position where you can share your knowledge and actually market yourself as experts and professionals as it is BugCrowd driving traffic to our website. So, I don't see a huge problem with the current state of things. That said, you will notice that I said yet before. So watch this space over time. What is the worst customer experience, or the worst experience BugCrowd has had with a customer? Why, and which lessons were learned? Like, I was stoked when I saw this come through, because this is actually one of my favorite stories. When we were, maybe a month and a half old, we'd run 2 programs at that point, and the third program was basically for a organization called Project Futures, which raises money to combat sex trafficking in Asia, which is a fantastic cause and a really cool business. And I was introduced to the founder of the company, and they wanted help assessing their risk, because obviously that's a risky thing to do, right? So okay, cool. I asked them, what can you pay the crowd, because we need to create an incentive for them, and they weren't in a position to offer anything from a cash perspective. So basically, what I said was, okay, this is a pure experiment. I don't know if this will work or not, but let's create the concept of charity points on the platform, and actually give people badges if they're working on charity programs for which they know they're not going to be financially rewarded, right? And then kind of went off from that. Yep, cool. Let's give it a go. Keep in mind, this is the third program that we ever ran. We let people within the community at that point in time know the nature of the organization and when the bounty was going to start. And when it kicked off, we released the targets to the folk that had put their hand up to participate, and we pretty much knocked them off the internet. The business actually went down for a day and a half or so, because the response from the crowd was so strong that we pretty much DDoSed them off the net. So, it was interesting, because the lessons learned from that, first one was, don't do that again. That sucks. And we haven't, but that was, learning it the hard way back at that point in time. Specifically, it's on us as BugCrowd to understand the resilience of a target space, and then throttle the number of researchers and what kind of testing is allowed according to how fragile or resilient that target might be. So we learned that, kind of the hard way, but pretty dramatically. But then the other thing that we learn is that, like, wow, hackers are awesome. I think, the whole idea that there's this public perception that people that can do bad things to a computer are inherently bad people. Like, we all know that isn't true, but it's a myth that's been told, and a story that's been told for the past 20 years. So there's a lot of inertia behind that concept. Like, all you need to do is do a Google image search on the word hacker, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. The fact that a cause like this could attract that kind of response from people that have that amount of value in what they're able to do as a day job, I think that was an incredible lesson to learn out of that as well. Would you love to hire bug hunters in BugCrowd Inc? Yeah, so Jay Cran and I first met through his participation on the platform. He was actually the first person to join the company here in the US. And he's an example of this. Jason Haddix was our #1 researcher just before he joined. A number of people in the application security engineering team and in custom success and other places of the business, we've actually identified them and found them and started engaging, firstly through their participation in bug hunting. So that's definitely something that we do and we have a history of as a business. It's also something that we actually encourage our customers to do, because at the end of the day, that's a win for everyone. Like, you guys who are doing the participation piece get the benefit of those introductions and potentially landing a new job, and for our customers it's goodwill. Like, they're getting access to talent, we're facilitating the conversation, we're making it work, and overall that feels to me like wins all around. So yes, we do, and yes, others do as well. In order to find low-hanging fruit, beginners have to find creative bugs, which comes with experience. How do you mend this gap and make it easy for beginners? Community. What we're doing today is all about essentially, not just answering this question, it's answering it for people that are able to find really difficult stuff and just want to expand their skill, but it's also for the newbies, like people that are coming in that are passionate about this, but aren't necessarily in the position yet in terms of their sophistication to be able to find these creative issues. So I think, engaging with the community, keeping an eye out for what Bugcrowd's doing, like making as many friends as possible as you can within this group of people, because it's a phenomenal community. That's the fastest way to learn and mend the gap, so to speak. And one thing I will say is that, you know, what we're doing here is trying to find things that are not meant to be there in the first place. So the whole idea of you know, how do we make this easier for people, like that's a little bit antithetical to the idea of you know, trying to make the internet more secure. But in terms of what you can do with your personal skill and your personal approach to bug hunting, you know, get on forums, get on, you know, the different Slack channels that are out there, like listen to talks and you know, conferences and stuff like this, and just ask your friends dumb questions. I think that's one of the really big things that you know, professionals of all types are generally quite hesitant to do, but is incredibly powerful if you can, you know, humble yourself to the point where you can find people that know what you want to know and just ask them stupid stuff. But then, you know, do it in a way where you're trying to add some value back to them as well. That can be a really fast path to learning a whole bunch in a very short space of time. And that is it. So I am going to ask Sam what we've had come in by way of other questions here. And otherwise, it's been fantastic chatting with you all. As I mentioned, Casey John Ellis on Twitter. My DMs are also open. So like Sam said, don't abuse it, but feel free to contact me, because I'm, you know, I think most folk who follow me on Twitter know that I am very chatty and happy to engage with people that want to learn stuff or want to pursue, you know, things, especially in bug bounty hunting and this whole hacking piece. But as I mentioned before, also in the entrepreneurship and startup space as well.
So here's a question from Shogun Lab, who asks, what are you guys doing at BugCrowd to foster a good culture, encourage companies/researchers to work with each other in a productive way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the big thing that we do around that, and the big thing we've done right since the beginning, is not treat it like it's just a platform. Because I think, you know, there's two groups of people in the mix here that are historically terrible at getting along, and have a high amount of suspicion for each or towards each other. It's something that I mentioned before. So like, to be able to facilitate that conversation and make that work, we don't just treat that as a technology problem. That's actually one of the reasons why, you know, the teams that run researcher operations, technical operations, and customer success are quite large, frankly, within BugCrowd, because we know that that's a difficult thing to do. And, you know, a large part of what we do is focus on treading that line between, you know, the hacker side of things and the customer side of things. We don't want to be in a position where we're falling over in either direction. We actually want to walk that tightrope and get it right. Because to me, that's the thing that's actually going to allow this whole concept and the whole, you know, bug bounty industry in general to grow, to become very large in the future.
So Oliver Dunk asked, and I know Peter just said your mic is bad.
My mic is bad, and I should feel bad. Sorry.
My mic is bad.
Oh, okay, cool.
So you'll just repeat the question, basically. Oliver Dunk asks what you do day to day. Are you interacting with companies? Are you doing bug hunting? What do you do day to day as a CEO?
Yeah, sure. So the question is, what do I do day to day as CEO? It's a blend of, you know, management, company stuff. Like there's a degree of like just general admin stuff that's kind of boring to talk about, but that is part of my day. The more exciting stuff that I get to do is spending as much time as I possibly can talking with customers and with bug hunters, and just learning stuff, like getting ideas, you know, sharing my opinion and getting feedback on it, like just, you know, in general, taking this industry forward as quickly as I can and learning as much as I can about it at the same time. You know, outside of that, I spend a lot of time with different, you know, all sorts of different people within the company. The majority of my time in that regard spent with my executive team, which is, you know, the core kind of VP and C-level folks within BugCrowd that report to me directly. So they're my generals, and, you know, really my main job within the business is to actually make them look good and support them as we grow the company. So hopefully that answers that question. Plus, I spend a bunch of time on Twitter. I'm usually like, you know, that's actually not so much during the day as it is like if I'm traveling to or from work, or getting kind of bored or like insomniac late at night. So if you catch me kind of on a run, that's usually when I'm sitting there just wanting to chat to people, and that's a good time to reach out and say hi.
Someone asked, what would you advise students going into college to study as a major?
Ooh. So, wow. I'm a really terrible person to ask that question, because I did exactly 6 weeks of a science degree before I dropped out and took up an IT engineering apprenticeship and basically learned everything on the job. So and even funnier, I was originally going to get into radiology, so I was planning to become a nuclear physicist or a nuclear doctor in that sense. So like, I don't know. I actually don't have a good answer to that question. I think CS degrees and cybersecurity degrees, they're challenged because of how quickly everything changes. Like, I think what you learn at the beginning of a 4-year degree is quite likely to become out of date by the end of it. There's core computing principles and core history around how the internet was born and stuff like that I think is really valuable to know. But yeah, I actually don't have a good answer to that question. I'm sorry.
This is an interesting question. What type of businesses do you think will pop up around the existing bug bounty ecosystem?
What type of businesses will pop up around the existing bug bounty ecosystem? Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a ton of things, and I'm trying to work out how to answer it, because half of them are bug crowd ideas that I probably shouldn't share on a webinar. Look, I think the kind of the lateral or the adjacent opportunity for customers and for the people in the hacker crowd to use this as a recruiting tool, or actually a career on ramp. And I'm not talking in like an annoying pestery type of way, and I'm talking in a way that's actually quite slick and productive. I see that as being something that will pop up as we go along. I mean, there's a lot of different technology methods and techniques that bug bounty hunters are kind of triangulating on because they're effective and there's a gap that I think are going to start to pop out as products in the industry. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff, but there's some stuff that we'll be working on that I can't talk about right now, and there's other things that I see just as a general trend in the industry that will probably happen as well.
Asked, what do you think bug bounties will be like in 5 years?
Great question. I think in 5 years' time, vulnerability disclosure, as in the expectation for companies to be proactive about creating a channel and a policy around reactively responding to reports that they get from folks like the people on this webinar. I think that'll be ubiquitous. I actually think that's going to tip as something that weird companies do to something that you're weird if you don't do over the next 2 years or so. And most of the driver of that will be, the increasing pressure from consumers for organizations to actually prove that they're taking appropriate measures to keep data safe and so on. And vulnerability disclosure is a very visible and I think leading indicator of the security maturity of an organization. So that's why I think that'll happen. In terms of bug bounties, some will incentivize. I don't think everyone will, but I think there'll be a decent chunk of the market that'll decide to, take vulnerability disclosure from being reactive to making it proactive by adding an incentive. But then also, I think that the piece that I've really focused on from the start with BugCrowd is this whole concept of taking the bug bounty concept and using it as basically the future of work in a lot of ways in cybersecurity when it comes to testing in particular. I think there's going to be a lot of growth in that area, and it's mostly because the existing solutions that we have and the existing ways that we're trying to get those problems solved aren't really working all that well, and the market's kind of tired of them. So, yeah, that's my prediction there.
What are your thoughts on someone being a full-time bug bounty hunter versus doing the regular job thing? What are your thoughts around that?
So what am excuse me? What are my thoughts around someone being a full-time bug bounty hunter versus doing a regular job? I mean, ¿por qué no es dos? I don't think there's a dichotomy there. I think the people that have they end up developing skill sets and methodologies in terms of how they test that leverage their unique creativity and their unique kind of preference, you know, to such an extent that they're able to support themselves full-time bug bounty hunting. You know, great, if you can do that, go for it. And I do think there's going to be plenty of fresh demand, you know, as this whole thing moves forward, as the market, you know, adopts the model and new targets get released. You know, in terms of people that work full-time, one of the things that I got asked about a little while back was this conflict between, you know, people that run pen test firms going out to the people that hunt within their firm and saying, no, you're not allowed to do that. That's competing against us. That's bad. That was a really big thing in the first probably year and a half of BugCrowd, because I think at that point everyone kind of shat themselves and you know, realized, wow, okay, this is actually a disruptive. This at least causes the question of disruption to how we do what we do in our industry. It's settled down since then, because I think the thing that kind of took over is, yeah, in some ways it is, but in a lot of ways it's also not. And also, if you've got people upskilling themselves, you know, of their own initiative and on their own time, like that actually is good for your business. So that's I've seen that wind back. But yeah, I mean, you can do both. I think, you know, if you can get yourself to a position where you can maintain your personal burn rate and have enough money to go and have some fun out of how you approach bug bounty hunting, then go right ahead and do that. And I know a lot of people who do. I don't necessarily think that everyone's capable of that. And also, I don't think the market's at the point just yet where there's enough supply side to support it, but I do think that'll shift over time.
So I guess this could be our last question.
Sure.
You could talk about what skill do you think is like the most successful skill, or what's the skill that the most successful hackers have? What's that like attribute about the best bug bounty hunters?
Yeah. Wow. I'm trying to select from them to pick the best one. I would say tenacity. And tenacity as applied to how they pursue the development of their own creativity, tenacity in terms of how they pursue vulnerabilities, and just, you know, you've got to look, and it's the same with startups and entrepreneurship as well. I think there's another good parallel here. You know, you've got to in some ways be the kind of person who will stare at a brick wall and say, you know what, I'm going to headbutt that thing until it falls over. Knowing that you actually can, because like if you can't, then that's stupid. But you get what I mean. It's a weird metaphor, but hopefully that paints the picture. And that applies to all different skill levels. So the reason why I was taking a bit of time to answer that is, you know, some people are incredibly gifted at what I would refer to as more QA style testing. And the reason they're gifted at it is because they're thorough and they know how to go looking in places that other people are going to miss. And that's actually where their creativity comes out. Yeah, and that's different to someone who can reverse a kernel on a mobile device, right? Like there's kind of different levels of creativity and skill that are being applied. But the commonality and the reason and the thing that actually brings success to you know, wherever you might sit on that spectrum is tenacity and drive to you know, succeed and get the things done that you want to get done. So yeah, be tenacious. That's my parting advice. Thanks very much, Sam. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciated you know, the opportunity to speak. As I said before, I'm humbled to be able to share with such an incredibly brilliant group of people. And yeah, let's keep the conversation going. Cheers.